become a society that euthanizes those not perfect? You know, there are three reasons, or three categories of reasons for babies being born blind, I've read. Firstly, that they have genetic and developmental causes. The next is maternal infections during pregnancy, and then complications from a premature birth. And whilst thankfully rare in the developed, in inverted commas, world, a baby born blind is not unknown even today. And sometimes there is reason that could have been addressed or avoided. The search for reasons is not always to be avoided. And in today's encounter with Jesus, it starts with first century questioning of the reasons for such blindness, the blindness associated with the man born blind. The questions are from those who've grown up within a religious society and naturally go down the question of sin. We live in a society where a stand-up comedian can encourage others to laugh at the real difficulties of his disability. But this man, the man encountering Jesus in our narrative today, is, I think it's fair to say, broken. In reality, it doesn't matter why he is blind. He is blind in a culture where you worked or you begged. And without braille, guide dogs, white sticks, camera images fed to the brain, as we saw on the news only a couple of weeks ago, and who knows what is coming next, maybe AI-empowered glasses that speak what the camera sees to hearing devices. I mean, there are AI-empowered self-driven cars these days. Why not use similar technology to help the blind? But he had none of it. Philosophical question for you. I should have had a special screen, shouldn't I? Philosophical question, but I thought, no, I won't do that. In that society, in first century Palestine, would you educate a blind child? I mean, you'd sort out their personal hygiene, of course, wouldn't you? You'd get that sorted out. And you'd probably try and get them to understand about maintaining safe personal space. But learning the scriptures? Learning to read? I mean, I feel a Chris McCausland quip coming my way, you know. I'm a blind man, what are you putting a book in front of me for? All those things his peers would have taken for granted, everything his parents expected for him, broken, gone, unable to work, a beggar, broken and dependent on sympathy, that most fluid of feelings that can be swayed by so many factors. But Jesus shifts the disciples' thinking. Seems like he says, don't look for a cause. He says, neither this man nor his parents sinned. Instead, look for opportunity for God to act. In the world of darkness that the man lives in, Jesus reminds his disciples, while I am in the world, I am the light of the world. No limits. Hidden away, though, in this rebuke of the disciples' thinking is a warning of limited opportunity. Jesus is on mission. The conversation with the disciples says they are on mission. By implication, I suppose, we ought to consider ourselves to be on mission. But the mission is limited. Jesus says, as long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. But there's a time when the mission will come to an end. Night is coming, he says, when no one can work. We talk, don't we, of brokenness that we see around us. Sorry, Benyam, but the lead thing we're going to say is the NHS. We all claim the NHS is broken. It's in a better place because Benyam's got that job. But it might be transport, or criminality or knife crime or education or simply the government itself? Do we understand we are on mission to this broken world? Or are we prepared to sit in the relative daylight until night comes and the task can't be undertaken? I wonder, did the disciples wake each morning wondering what challenge Jesus would face them with today? What deep question today would stretch their understanding? And then very simply, Jesus spat on the ground, made some mud with the saliva and put it on the man's eyes. Perhaps you go, yuck. Why would he do that? I'm sure we're all different, and at this point, can I just say and reassure particularly Sam that as a qualified first aider, I want to say personal first aid is different to using your first aid training on others. But yeah, if I cut my finger, if I get a paper cut or doing a bit of craft and I cut my finger, the first thing I do is stick it in my mouth and I suck it. And you know, if nothing else, it cleans it, doesn't it? I just stick it in there in the saliva. And if I get a sting or a bite, I do the same thing. And did I do that for my children? Yeah, I did. I do it for my grandson. First century society held that saliva had some sort of healing power. Mixed with the mud, well, mud packs are used to improve the skin, I'm told. I've never tried it. But, you know, at the Dead Sea, and honestly, again, I'm going to refer to Benjamin. He wants to be a cardiologist. I've got to be careful here, haven't I? Of course, I didn't go and sort of float in the Dead Sea with my pacemaker and all that stuff. Not. They recommend that when you're in the Dead Sea, you smear your body with the mud and let it dry and cake on because it's good for you. And then you shower it off. Well, while all of this may have contributed to Jesus making up the mud and placing it on the man's eyes, I think it's fair to say that the purpose was not some ancient healing tale. Rather, it was to give instruction and to expect obedience. And the man, well, he was obedient. He went to the pool that he was sent to, washed the mud from his eyes, and returned home. And once again, not for the first time in this series of encounters, I'm reminded of Naaman. Such simple instruction, possibly too simple. I mean, in this situation, what difference does it make where I wash? Surely that's what you would think. An animal trough would suffice, surely, or a bowl of water at home. But the encounter with Jesus is so powerful that Jesus speaks and this man is compelled to do as instructed. How many examples do we know where people don't know engage with Jesus at this level? Either in the scriptures or life today. Follow me, Jesus says. Leave your life of sin, Jesus says. Go to this place or that, Jesus says. The miracle was dependent on his obedience to do what Jesus said. And having been obedient, he came home seeing. Well, what a party must have been thrown. Can you imagine it? A man born blind can see. His life is no longer one of brokenness. I mean, he may need to catch up. He's got to catch up an awful lot. But surely there was joy and excitement. Surely we respond to God's actions with joy and excitement ourselves, don't we? Surely healing results in rejoicing. Or do we question? Do we continue maybe to mourn with those who still suffer? Does the joy soon dissipate into the surroundings? Some of this man's family neighbours claimed he was the person they knew. Others disagreed, saying he just looked like him. It's not surprising, really, is it? People born blind don't go out feeling their way down the sort of pathway and come back seeing. But even when the man himself claimed to be the man who had sat and begged, they didn't all believe him. Questioned by the sceptical about how his eyes were open, he replied, "The man they called Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and then I could see." Faithfully retelling the story of the day, he explained what Jesus had done. But did you notice? It's quite subtle in here. Despite the impact that Jesus was making in Galilee and Jerusalem and all around, this was a community who didn't know much about Jesus, if anything, or at least they didn't seem to. The man referred to him as the man they called Jesus. The neighbours' response was, "Where is this man?" They certainly didn't have much knowledge of Jesus. And so the blind man is presented to the Pharisees, or the once blind man, should I say, is presented to the Pharisees. Oh dear. Guess what? Here is a man who has begged for his living probably all his adult life, and maybe longer. They may not know who he is, because perhaps they never went that way. But blind he was, and seeing he is, you'd think they would celebrate with the man. But no. The healing has taken place on the Sabbath. I think maybe we'll be exploring this in a bit more detail on Wednesday night. So I'll try not to steal your thunder too much, Anne. But Jesus broke at least 2 of the Pharisees' Sabbath rules, possibly 3, depending on which school of thought the Pharisees came from. How could someone who broke the Sabbath be a man of God? Basic statement, I suppose. How could this be done, this man be given his sight back, by someone who broke the Sabbath? How could this not be done by a man of God? Questions. So many questions. They even referred to Jesus as a sinner. But the council is divided. Religious thought couldn't cope with these contradictions. The neighbours couldn't agree, neither could the Pharisees. The man and his miracle divided opinion. But despite the division, thought about him and what had happened, the man held firm to his encounter. "He put mud on my eyes," the man replied, "and I washed and now I see." A relationship was established in that encounter. As Jesus smeared mud on his eyes and sent him to wash, something more than religion was at work. The council couldn't leave it. Sabbath rules had been broken. This was a chance to deal with Jesus. Meanwhile, the man becomes bold. The interrogation continues at a pace, and now he refers to Jesus as a prophet, probably the highest term he could think to use at the time. He started in his thinking as a man. Now he's a prophet. And then in verse 33, he steps it up again. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. In verse 27, he even asks the Pharisees if they're so interested in Jesus that they want to be his disciple too. And if you stop and think, Actually, is he saying that he himself has made his mind up and he's now a disciple, a follower of Jesus? The increasing boldness of our sort of character, this man who can now see, infuriates the Pharisees. They interview his parents, who choose to distance themselves not from him, but from what has happened. It's possibly a community where not only is little known of Jesus, but the synagogue seems as though it's probably ruled with a fist of iron. Somewhere where showing even the smallest dissent, where showing an interest in Jesus, for instance, can lead to being cut off. And then the leaders make a glaring error. They admit that this man who made mud for the blind man's eyes, whose sight was restored when he washed away the mud, this Jesus was a conundrum. They didn't even know where he was from. And so the man states his position. Eloquently, he says, now that is remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly person who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. Only God, he says, could give him his sight back. God has given him sight. He has vision. It's too much for the Pharisees. They throw him out, insulting him as they do so. And Jesus goes and finds him. And he takes on the Daniel 7 reference to the Son of Man. The Son of Man is one who will come to judge. And he reveals himself as the one to the formerly blind beggar who should be believed in. The man says, Lord, I believe. And he worshipped him. Do you notice? Jesus doesn't rebuke the worship. Well, whilst to us that's just right, because we come to Scripture knowing so much, don't we? But surely this must have been revealing to the man himself and to the disciples. Jesus allowed this man with miraculous sight to worship him. And then Jesus goes on to sum up the whole incident. For judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind. Now, just 3 verses from the end of the passage, and quite possibly you're stuck. Your mouth might even be open as you think about that verse that I've just read, that Jesus said. Maybe your mind's jumping around. Flip back a few pages to chapter 3, verse 17. And Jesus said, for God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. Judgment here, but no condemnation there. This seems like there might be a contradiction. This is what the author of the Bible Speaks Today says about this particular verse. The texts, however, are surely reconcilable. Jesus did not come specifically and primarily to condemn or to effect damning judgment. He came primarily and specifically to save sinners in this lost and fallen world. But his coming results both in salvation and in judgment. The light shines in the darkness. Those who welcome it are delivered into the light, but those who refuse it turn away into a deeper darkness. Ken, would you mind going and speaking? Simon and they've just brought a shoebox. If you wouldn't mind, thank you. Those who welcome it are delivered into the light, but those who refuse it turn away into a deeper darkness. The same light both dispels darkness and casts shadows. The Pharisees, overhearing, query its relation to themselves. Are we blind too, they say? If they were without any moral responsibility for their response to Jesus, the light of the world, they would indeed be blind with a good blindness, in contrast to their present plight. But since they actually are responsible and yet reject the light, their guilt remains. It's a terrible condition. The Pharisees may think they see and understand, but they lack spiritual sight. Spiritual vision must be our desire above all. We do not encounter Jesus with questions and do not encounter Jesus with questions and preconceived ideas. Or do we come believing and worship him as the man born blind did? This encounter is so noticeably different, isn't it, to the man at Bethesda. Here is a man whose life is utterly transformed. We need to trust God to use our struggles. He was broken. We need to trust that God will use our struggles to his glory. Here is a man who was obedient even when it seemed so unnecessary to go to a specific place to wash. We need to obey his word, even when it seems unusual and is it really necessary? Here is a man who became bold as he spoke with the leaders. It was his story, his encounter, and he owned it for himself. We need to be bold and not let fear of people or religion silence our testimony. Here is a man who saw the Son of Man and worshipped him. We need to worship Jesus as the light of the world who opens blind eyes. What's your testimony? What story of encountering Jesus do you have to tell? Hold it firm and tell it. We're going to sing a hymn to finish our worship, so I just need to go knock on the door and get Mary to come out. But we're going to sing the hymn Trust and Obey, because there's no other way. Seems to be the most appropriate thing, it's in my mind, for us to sing. But just let me get Mary. Can we have a pianist, please? So if you like to stand, and we'll all join together to worship as we bring our service to a close.